Welcome in, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. Your host, Loren Sherman, is a certified financial planner and owner of the flat fee firm Integrity Wealth Management. He curates each episode with you in mind. Whether a work-optional lifestyle is on the horizon or you're already there, this show has something for you. With that, listen in, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Well, let's kick this off. So welcome back, Jacob Schroeder, for a return visit to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. So first off, thank you for joining me, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
And before getting into everything, I want to share some of your background with our audience and also acknowledge the fact that I've been on a little bit of a hiatus from these podcast episodes for a little while. So if I'm a little bit rusty out of the gate, it's probably because I haven't been behind the microphone for a little bit. So, the end of the year gets really busy every year with end of year financial planning and stuff like that. And then really the beginning of the year, people have their goals that they want to talk about. They kind of want to hit the ground running. So it seems that those last couple of months of the year and the first couple of months of the year always seem to be the most busy in the business. Preparing for tax returns and tax planning on top of that. But so sometimes we step away a little bit. So forgive me if I'm a little bit rusty out of the gate. But
everyone needs a break. It's good. Yeah. It's fine.
There you go. And I try to really do these episodes where it's something that really is interesting to me and I think will be interesting to the audience. So I know everyone will tell you, hey, you got to be on a schedule of if you're doing every 2 weeks, do every 2 weeks. And I try to stick to that. But I also have never forced myself of, hey, let's just come up with a topic just because it's 2 weeks. So, you're here again because I found this really interesting, the articles you put out. So, to our audience, Jacob's name may look familiar. He's one of our past guests, although that one wasn't audio only. So now you're joining us in video. See his face as we go. It is funny. I listen to podcasts sometimes, and it is a different experience when you can visually see it versus just listening to it. But
yeah, usually everyone has a different face to what you would think.
Right. With that said, most of our listeners still are audio only, is how they're listening to this podcast up till this point, at least. So maybe that will change, but. Sure. If anyone would like to go back and check out the first appearance on the show, that was a 2-part conversation titled 5 Reasons You'll Blow Up Your Retirement Plan. So I don't know if that one rings a bell in your mind or if that feels like a lifetime ago, but that was the first one that we did. That was a really fun conversation, one worth checking out if you missed it the first time. And Jacob, you actually came in on my radar because we did a review of a different article you wrote. This was before I was having guests on the show, so I just did a solo breakdown of this one. And that one was called 6 Life-Changing Lessons from 2 Retirees. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit about Jacob's background. He's also a longtime contributor to Kiplinger magazine. I always have struggle saying that one. He's the author of a personal finance newsletter called The Root of All, which explores how money shapes our lives. So what do you think? I was a little bit rusty. Did I nail the intro?
You got it. And, again, I appreciate you having me on, and that's a good summary, I think.
Do some memories pop in your head after I mentioned a couple of those articles you've written in the past?
Yeah, it does. And, it brings to mind just the fact that experiences, we try to approach retirement as kind of a certain stage that we get to, and it's the same for everyone. But really, it's an individual experience, really. I mean, it certainly is a stage that we're all trying to get to. But the experience of what it actually is going to vary from one person to the next. And so when you're bringing that stuff up, you have some individuals in which you reach retirement and all of a sudden you really got to pivot. You got to make a lot of different decisions that you didn't anticipate. And then meanwhile, you have some individuals who completely redefine their identity. When you're talking about the article in regards to like the 6 important lessons, this is about retirees who essentially have got to that point and then realized they still wanted to accomplish a lot in life and do
Yeah.
things that really made a difference. So it varies. I mean, it's pretty interesting, really, how personal finance can be, especially
Right.
in relation to retirement.
Right. And I'll be sure to link those in the show notes. So if anybody does want to go back to listen to those, which is something I do a lot personally, not necessarily my own episodes. I'm not going back and listening to all of my own, although some of them I do. But I have some of my favorite episodes that are teaching different lessons from other podcasts I listen to. And then I'll go back and listen to them occasionally because it's something you can continue to learn from. And it's not just to check the box of, hey, I listened to that one. But so last time, each episode we stuck to just kind of covering the article that you wrote. This will be a little bit different. We're going to grab a few questions from different articles you've written, maybe bounce around a little bit, but mostly with the theme of a FIRE retirement. Sound good?
Absolutely.
So let's start there. Speaking of the FIRE movement, which stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. And some of our listeners have probably heard of this, but for those who adopt this strategy, a lot of people really go all in with it. It's kind of like the joke about CrossFit. You'll know that someone's in CrossFit because they're going to tell you they are. That's a little bit, in my experience, about the FIRE movement of retirement. So the name Financial Independence, Retire Early, of course, that kind of gives us a pretty good clue of what it's all about. But can you tell us more specifically what FIRE is and maybe why it has such passionate followers?
Yeah, you're certainly right. It is kind of the reason that it's often characterized as a movement is because the followers of it are so passionate. I mean, it becomes almost an identity to people. I mean, there's definitely a certain sense of belonging. It's almost like a tribal thing. You have
Right.
annual conferences, you have a multitude of different blogs you can find out there with influencers who are spreading the message of FIRE. There's massive online communities. I think there's a subreddit. The last time I checked, it had is a Reddit group for financial independence, and it had around 2 million followers. I mean,
Oh, wow.
this thing is pretty massive. But certainly at its core, it's a strategy for reaching financial independence as early as possible. That's kind of the
Yeah.
gist of it. And what that means is saving and investing or aggressively, um, you know, the typical 10 to 15% savings rate that you kind of get from traditional advice, that doesn't apply. People that are part of this strategy are going to like 25%. Some are going up to 50%. I've heard some people claim that they're saving 75% of their
Wow.
income, which is that's pretty extreme. But people are committing to that high level of savings, and in the meantime, you're of course keeping your expenses as low as possible. And it's all just predicated on that goal of trying to eventually save enough to live off your investments, and essentially buy back your time so that you can do whatever it is you want to do. And what that number is will vary from person to person based off their lifestyle and everything. And also what financial independence and what retire early even means can vary from person to person. I
Right.
mean, for some people, it's just trying to get out of their job in their 30s or 40s. For other people, it's just about having that freedom to go do something else, whether that's launching a business, um, eventually working for a nonprofit, trying to promote a certain cause that they really care about.
Yeah.
It just comes down to really trying to achieve financial freedom and having options to do what you want to do. And that's really kind of struck a chord with people today. And I mean, despite its popularity, though, it's certainly not new. I think the concept really kind of originated with a book from the 1990s. It's called Your Money or Your Life.
Okay.
But I think it really kind of started, I would say that popularity started to really kind of generate in the aftermath of the great financial crisis,
Sure.
where you had you had individuals that really kind of realized, like, okay, it is really important to have my long-term savings secure, that, I really need to kind of do whatever I could, because you never know what's going to come around the corner. And I think on top of that, people started to realize that, some of these big financial experts and these banks, maybe they don't really know what they're doing. Maybe they really can't beat the market like they claim they can. Maybe I'd be better off just investing in some low cost funds, and living below my means. I mean, all that
Right.
stuff sounds pretty simple, but it's certainly not easy. And it wasn't the kind of attitude a lot of people have that they have today. And certainly that kind of worked out, because since then we've had this big long bull market. So
Yeah.
that certainly has made a lot of sense. On top of that, things became more technologically feasible and accessible as far as, accessing investments. I mean, it became easy to just jump on Vanguard's website or whomever and just open up an account,
Right.
which wasn't that possible before. So it's easy to kind of join this movement, start kind of setting the pieces into place. And
Yeah.
certainly at the same time, over the past 10, 15 years, social media has kind of arisen, and that's played a huge role, because you have a lot
Sure.
of people that have kind of built their identity on the movement and sharing information about it. But I
I
do want to say, based off my conversation with people that are pursuing FIRE, based on advisors that are serving these people as well, is that it draws a lot of people, not necessarily for the financial aspect. It's also just, it's the challenge. I mean, it's almost like training for a marathon or mastering a skill. It's something that you're doing that's greater than yourself. And that provides that sense of identity, and that
right.
challenge that people want. And then, of course, the benefits of all that is financial security, some financial peace of mind, and freedom. And that
Yeah.
just kind of brings to mind that quote from Chris Rock. You might have heard it, where he said, "Wealth is not about money, not about having money. It's about having options." And I think
Mm.
that's kind of at the heart of the FIRE movement.
Right. Yeah, that's a good background. I think a few things popped in my head, and we'll circle back to some of this. But I have noticed that people within that FIRE movement, they really understand the power of compounding interest too.
Right.
And sometimes they'll even reframe, not buying a $5, $7 cup of coffee into, hey, if I do this enough days, enough months, enough years, and save those dollars, and actually do reinvest them, because of course the easy thing to do is not spend it on this, but then just spend it on something else. But I think the people that really dive into this and understand the power of compounding, they are actually redirecting a lot of those dollars to increase that percent, like you said, above the standard 10, 15,
Hmm.
20% savings rate. And it's kind of wild how much you can add to a portfolio by not buying a Starbucks cup of coffee every day. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean you have to bypass the coffee, just if you're making it at home instead. And I know coffee is always kind of the one that gets picked on, but that's one
Right.
that's easy to compound over time, because a lot of people do it daily. Here, as I have my coffee next to me.
Yeah, and I don't think it necessarily has to mean sacrifice to that extent, but I mean, I do think that that's just a good example of showing that, yeah, there certainly a lot of people in the fair community are extremely financially literate and
Hmm.
financially savvy, and so they really, I mean, they're the type of people that would look at what's happening right now with market volatility and uncertainty and thinking, well, oh well, stocks might be cheaper.
Hmm.
I'm gonna buy even more because that works for me in the long
Right.
term. So I definitely think that there's an extreme intentionality with the decisions that they make.
Yeah. One other thing that popped in my head before I move on, you mentioned how much easier it is for someone to open a Vanguard account, for example, and do some of this on their own, and that's the positive side of it, which is a huge positive. But I also see, I don't know if you completely put it in the negative category, but the investing world can kind of become gamified too, where it makes it very easy for people to be hopping in and out of investments, doing a ton of trading. You have it, everybody's got it right there on their phone, where they're able to just have it at their fingertips at every moment of their life. And sometimes that leads people into investing into some things that maybe are not the best things to invest in, but are really, really exciting, and they might triple or they might disappear overnight. So I see kind of both sides of that, the good and the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. There can be a potential downside to that. I mean, certainly not only from the platform perspective of maybe having like a Robinhood account and having it gamified with like confetti and things like that, but
Right.
also just getting access to too much information can have its own drawback where there's a lot of people are pretty open with their finances and say like a Reddit forum or things like
Yeah.
that in which they're saying like here's my assets, what do people think? And you can have people that can try to chime in and steer you in the wrong direction that might say like, oh, actually you could probably do better to invest X, Y, and Z, and they can be very convincing. Or, you
Sure.
certainly, like I mentioned, influencers. There's a lot of
Yeah.
finfluencers is
Okay.
what they might be called, influencers in the financial space that really don't have the regular investor's best interests in mind. I mean, there's
Sure.
certainly pitching stuff that maybe might financially benefit themselves, but not the people that are watching their videos. So you
Yeah.
certainly got to be careful with that.
They might not be putting out a video from a fiduciary standpoint. They're putting it out to
No.
get it maximum number of
Right.
views, I suppose. So when you talk with different financial advisors, you're doing a lot of research for your articles. Based on what you've seen and based on what other advisors have shared with you, what are some of the pitfalls that you could see with the FIRE strategy?
Sure. Like any financial strategy, the fire it comes with trade-offs. I
Yeah.
mean, I think a huge challenge that people have when they're trying to pursue fire is just burnout. I mean, it's a lot of people, unless you have a high income, I mean, you're gonna potentially have to adopt some minimalist lifestyle, maybe into the extreme end, to save as much as possible, and that can be tough to sustain. I mean,
Mm.
it's easy to commit to it on paper and thinking about it in kind of an abstract sense. It's
Right.
much harder when you actually have to make those decisions in real life because that could mean skipping your best friend's destination wedding or
Right.
foregoing vacations. Maybe you have a long commute to your office, and so you got to deal with public transportation to save
Mm.
money. That level of sacrifice may be necessary to hit your savings target, but it can wear you down over time.
Yeah.
That's a big one when you're in the pursuit of that.
I could see that, the social pressure around you. It probably helps if you have a couple of friends who are in a similar boat trying to do the same thing. And
Right.
obviously, if you're married, you got to have both parties on board. I bet that could be quite a challenge if you're both not quite there with it.
Yeah, because that could be making decisions as to do we buy a house? If we do, where do we buy it? That type of thing. Will I have enough room? Should we, delay having children? Things like that. I mean, those are really hard decisions to
Hmm.
make, and especially when it comes to just trying to put like a price tag on those things.
Right.
So that can be really challenging for a lot of folks. And that's kind of why there's actually a spectrum of fire in a sense. There are different variations of
Yeah.
fire. For example, in this context, there's barista fire, in which essentially the strategy is to kind of upfront your savings. You save aggressively as much as you can up front, but then you keep on working and let those funds compound because you already got your savings. They'll compound over the time that you continue to work, but maybe you have the flexibility to switch to a lesser stress job or part-time work or
Mm.
something, and then you just use that income for your expenses
Okay.
because you're not saving anymore because you have that nest egg that's just kind of compounding over time, but you're
Sure.
not going to leave the workforce, so you at least can cover your expenses. That's a little bit more flexible.
Do you know, not having complete, I don't live in the world of the FIRE movement and everything, so I don't know the ins and outs. Is it standard to consider Social Security as part of your future income when you're doing your calculations within that, or is that probably once again where there's different schools of thought?
Yeah, I've seen different schools of thought, and it's definitely predicated on how long you've been working. I mean, certainly if
Right.
you want to be kind of at a later age of fire into your 50s or something like that, then certainly Social Security probably would play a bigger role once you hit that. I think it's a minimum 10 years or so in which you're eligible or something along those lines. But certainly when you had reached, into your 50s, you probably have had a higher income at some point. So that might make a big difference. It certainly is something that benefits everyone if you can get that guaranteed income stream. But I think most of the attention is just focused on the investment side, your own
Sure.
retirement accounts and things like that. And certainly that might be a bigger role if there's ever changes to the Social Security program in the future, which, I mean, there's ongoing discussions about
Right.
it. So who knows?
It's always a hot topic, but I think it's always one that they're worried. Either they don't want to disrupt their voters on either side
Right.
by disrupting too much with Social Security. But who knows? By the time we get there, it will probably have to be 75 before we're collecting. I think that's kind of their easiest fix is just to keep pushing out the age and maybe capping it and things like that.
Right, exactly. I mean, well, heck, if we're looking at longer, healthier lives, then maybe maybe it'll make sense. I mean, but
Yeah.
that it kind of relates to another pitfall, and that's certainly when you do retire early. I mean, that's got a serious financial risk, especially when it comes to trying to set a safe withdrawal rate, because I
Sure.
mean, certainly the classic 4% withdrawal rule is a common starting point, taking 4% and then adjusting for
Right.
inflation every year. But that was predicated on a 30-year retirement. If
Yeah.
you actually get to an early retirement is, in your 40s or something, I mean, you're looking at potentially 50 years in retirement, and 4% just might be too aggressive. I mean, the thing is, if when you retire early, all those retirement risks like longevity risk, market risk, inflation, all those risks are magnified because you have
Right.
so many more years to deal with, which is good and bad, of course, but you might have to consider withdrawing a lower amount than you anticipate. So that's something you really kind of got to plan around. I mean, you might need to think about looking at some other supplemental form of income if that turns out to be the case, especially if you get into that early retirement and find out that, hey, you're spending down more than you can deal with. Maybe you need to start
Right.
building another income stream.
Right. And that's especially true if referencing the past article that you wrote about living to, potentially age 120 or even hypothetically 150. That's kind of hard for me to even wrap my head around. But if people were to live much, much
Right.
longer than what we're kind of used to, gosh, you're putting a lot more pressure on that portfolio to perform over that many years.
Yeah, there's just to touch on that for a little bit. I mean, there are a lot of medical advances kind of coming down the pipeline, and a lot of money and research being dedicated to longevity. And I mean, we saw the impact of GLP-1 drugs and things that we're finding out what those can do. We don't know what might be coming after that. That could potentially have a ton of benefits, which some researchers claim that it should be relatively feasible to hit the age of 150. I mean, you had one cell researcher who says that he thinks that the person that's going to live to 150 has already been born.
Hmm.
They're already here because of the medical advances that are going to be coming in the next 10, 20 years that potentially could extend our lifespan that much. So,
Interesting.
yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes in the future, I think.
And that
So,
doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be living that long healthier. It
yeah,
might just
yep,
mean
that's
it
the
might mean the
crux of
last
it.
X number of years could mean pretty big medical expenses, and
Right.
or maybe not necessarily medical expenses like you're living a life homebound, but or bedridden, but that if you're having to rely on expensive medications and things like that, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the the one piece of advice is try to start eating healthy and exercising as much as you can now, because who knows what the future is going to be like later. I mean, you can certainly, it's what good is it if you're living a long life if you can't really enjoy it?
hmm yeah, and that kind of pivots to another one that I had on the radar as far as potentially a pitfall. I don't know if you could call it a pitfall or not, but what I've seen just anecdotally, I guess in my own practice, and I've read some on the FIRE movement, is that people are really good with the financial independence part, maybe the first two letters of it. And then the retire early sometimes is the struggle because they do such a good job getting themselves into this maximum savings headspace, and then moving on to retirement or enjoying the fruits of their labor. I see this with a lot of retirees who are not even doing a FIRE strategy. So I would think that it would be even a bigger hurdle for people who are really, really taking that to the extreme. I mean, how difficult would that be for a lot of these people to enjoy their funds after, saving to the max for so many years and being in that headspace that we cannot waste a single dollar, particularly for those who take it to the extreme.
Yeah, that's a good point, and there is just that hesitancy to kind of make that switch from saving to spending, because the fear, I think a lot of it pertains to just kind of our mental natural, or the natural way that we think is we have that tendency to think of loss aversion, where we certainly feel the pain of a loss much more than the joy of a gain. So
Right.
it's always a challenge because you can't see into the future or what might be coming. But I think that's where it comes into the planning aspect of making sure that you then have certain aspects available to you of a good financial plan, where you have an emergency fund, you have confidence in your withdrawal rate. Maybe you follow some type of bucket strategy or something that
Yeah.
kind of helps you kind of sleep at night. But also just committing to the fact that your money is there and it can go up, it can go down, but your time is only going down. It only goes in one direction. And so you're either going to use that money to enjoy the time you have, or you're just going to end up kind of wasting both.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and that's a hard thing to formulate, of course, because, I mean, again, things happen in life. So, but it's something that you need to kind of incorporate into your financial plan to not only be so diligent and intentional with your money, but what you actually then do with that money after the fact.
Right. Yeah, speaking to that point too, I think I've seen a lot of times where people hem and haw and think about retiring, and they're like, well, I could go a couple more years. And that's all great if they really enjoy what they do. I wouldn't encourage anyone to jump out early, but sometimes if they're like, oh, I really don't enjoy this, but I'm going to stick it out for a couple more years. And then sometimes, unfortunately, what really kind of pushes them over the line to actually retire is a health challenge, either to them or to someone really close to them. And like, just to your point of, the assets may continue to go up, but your time is always dwindling. That's an interesting framework, because you really have to ask yourself, well, what are we doing this all for, and what are we making these sacrifices for? Because if it's just to build this pile of money and that's the end goal, that's maybe not particularly rewarding.
Right. And that's a testament to the fact that a lot of pitfalls for retirement in general are kind of psychological. And I think that's certainly the case with the FIRE. I think some people that pursue FIRE status kind of fall under the delusion that, if I just earn a certain amount of money, then I'll be happy. If I just get out of this job, or I can just stop working, then I'll be happy. And that's not always the case. Some surveys show that FIRE achievers report feeling lost or even depressed because they didn't plan for actually retiring or doing something after they've achieved that level of financial independence. Quick stories that I interviewed a doctor who had his own successful practice, but he was burned out by the demands of the job. He was working 7 days a week, 10 plus hours a day, was completely burned out, so decided, I'm just going to commit to saving as much as I can, and I'm going to just sell my practice, and then, I'm going to live a happy life. But once he actually reached that point and walked away from the medical field, he felt aimless, felt unfulfilled. And it wasn't until he started to actually go back into medicine, working for a nonprofit, which was less stressful, but doing the work again, and then he actually started to do some educational content about FIRE. And those two things kind of gave him that sense of purpose again. I think a lot of people underestimate the sense of purpose that work can provide, and that if you don't retire to something, or at least have a plan after you kind of reached this FIRE goal, then you're setting yourself up for failure in a way. And that's why, too, I think a common thing among the FIRE community is you see a lot of people get there and then they start producing their own blog or start doing their own courses that they might sell. And it's not necessarily for the financial aspect of it all. It's just to kind of have something to do generally. Right.
I mean, that reminds me, I'm in a couple of morning groups, and a lot of the guys that go to it are retired, and they say retirement means you're working just as much, you're just not getting paid for it. So
yeah, exactly.
That's kind of their perspective on it. But hey, everyone, it's Loren here. I apologize for the interruption, but I thought it'd be a little bit better to do 2 30-minute episodes with Jacob rather than fit it all into one at 60 minutes. So we will be back in 2 weeks for the conclusion with Jacob. So be sure to come back for that. And I appreciate you coming back. I was on a little bit of a break, but it's good to be back in front of the microphone. You can find all of our past episodes at integrityguidance.com. Just use that, hit the podcast tab there, and you'll find everything. I think that's about it for housekeeping. We'll come back in 2 weeks, like I said. So until then, God bless, and I look forward to your return for part 2 with Jacob.
Thank you for listening in and supporting this show. And if you have a moment, we'd love a 5-star review to help this podcast reach even more listeners. Also, this show thrives on feedback from its audience. So if you have any topics you'd like to hear covered, or have anyone specific you'd like to see join the show, please email your recommendations to our address, hello@integrityguidance.com. That's hello@integrityguidance.com. We review every email that comes in, and we will do our best to include any recommendations you have for us. Thanks again, and be sure to follow our show so you don't miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Loren Sherman is a certified financial planner and owner of Integrity Wealth Management, a flat fee firm which serves pre-retirees and retirees in search of their own work optional lifestyle.